Yeah, so we're talking about communication with my funny Italian accent, which is amazing. So we try to have, a different discipline in this panel just because, people think there is a magic bullet to do PR, marketing, community management, social media management, and in general, essentially, finding a way to have people discover your product. So I would like to just ask you guys as the very first question, which is, is the elephant in the room? Is there a magic bullet or a formula or a one-size-fits-all strategy to get being seen by influencers, media, and build up a community? Lots of people say that doing PR or generally communication is really easy. So my question for you is it so easy? And is there a magic bullet for it?
Magic bullet's no, right?
Ladies first.
I think it's probably worth saying that you do have to consider it. There's no one-size-fits-all plan, but you do have to have this in your plan. I should probably say, before I joined CD Projekt Red, I actually ran a YouTube channel for 5 years, basically just covering games. So we were sort of the target for a lot of developers, and that's sort of how we know what people need to do this. There is no one-size-fits-all campaign because there's no one-size-fits-all game. We know that people that play games vary, what they like vary, the platforms they play on vary. So of course, there's no copy-paste campaign, but you do have to consider one.
Korina?
Yeah, essentially that. I mean, the short answer is no, there isn't one size. But, you know your title better than anyone else. And you also know how to get to the crux of what makes it interesting. That's why you took it from a prototype to a final product. So ultimately, I guess as we go through the panel, we're all on different disciplines, you'll kind of see how working with people like us, or at least kind of learning from people like us, can help benefit you. Especially, if you look at journalism as a force, you can really see just by looking at similar titles, potentially where the interest could come from and what the audience could look like.
I think speaking from a kind of traditional media perspective, it's important to kind of be aware the kind of the amount of competition that's out there, especially in the independent space. The editors of these sites are receiving thousands and thousands of emails in a week, so you really need to stand out amongst that. I think it's really important that a game has a story, whether that's a personal story or something that makes the game kind of unique among the genre. I mean, certainly I spent some time at Platonic Games, kind of working on a ukulele, and our story was that obviously the pedigree of the development team and the games they've worked on in the past, and that's it's never been more relevant than now in the traditional media, that editors and journalists are looking for those personal stories and to talk a bit more about the people behind the games. And I do think from that perspective, it's very, very important to think about what makes your game interesting and stand out in the marketplace. And also, it really surprised me working with a development team how unaware some developers can be about their story and how fantastic their anecdotes are, and the personal challenges they had to overcome to get the game made. Those are really, really interesting kind of elements that can elevate your game for journalists especially.
I think the biggest problem always is you need to figure out what platform you want to build for, right? So Steam, for example, on Steam, there's, doing some research before today, there's on average 200 games that get put out a week on Steam.
A week, yeah.
It's absolutely huge, and it's going up every single year. It's like
160 this week, actually.
Exactly, and it has 25% increase from next year. So if you have a product and you're not entirely sure what the story is, that's a massive problem for everyone that's working at your company, because you need that story, you need that seed to get everyone interested, press, influencers, and people like us as well, to kind of to help you bring your game to market.
I think it's also worth noting your campaign is not something you can just do overnight. The idea of the campaign is it should be long running, and it builds with the game. It doesn't need to be there at the birth of the game, but you need to consider your campaign well before you plan on launching the game, so that press can be following the journey, can have many, many opportunities to see you, to remember your name, to follow that path. up until launch. But just saying, okay, the game's out next week, what's our launch campaign going to be? It's too little, often far too late. So you really need to be building this from the beginning.
And then this actually connects me to my next question, which is, as you can see from my hair, I'm quite old, so I've been in PR for such a long time, and there was no internet when I started doing PR. Now, in 2019, there is different channels. There is different channels. So of course you got the traditional media, you got influencers, you got traditional marketing, you got influencers marketing, you got all these different disciplines. There is the community building. So, and a lot of time when I spoke with potential clients or actual clients, sometimes they say, "Oh, we're gonna do all influencers," or we're gonna do traditional media, or we're gonna do. And it's very confusing. So my question for the panel is, do you think that one channel is more trustful or effective than other? Like, is traditional media, with all the changing media landscape, more trustable than influencers, or vice versa? Or actually is a combination of everything? And what do you think in your experience? Because all of you have got lots of experience we're going to touch in a second. But I think what Andy said about that lots of time developers are sometimes unaware, and it's normal because it's not their job. They have a huge job to creating the game, which is the main thing. What is the best channel? Is there a best channel, a best discipline? Or you think it's more a combination of anything? And what is in your personal experiences?
So I would say what Hollie said at the beginning is absolutely accurate, in that every game is different and every potential audience is different as well. So from my experience working on multiple indie titles, until you actually start talking about your products, you don't really know what platform is the best one in order for you to get attention. So you should try and focus on all of them. Track all the data that you can, see what mileage you get with traditional media, see what mileage you get with influencers, and kind of see what visibility KPIs that you've got, see if it moves the needle in any meaningful way. I mean, I think there's loads of attention drawn on the impact of influencers. So when we say influencers, we're talking social media, we're talking Twitch, we're talking YouTube, but there's still very much a place for traditional media as well. I don't know what you guys think.
I think, yeah, kind of building on that, a lot of it is down to just having a robust idea of what your marketing strategy is and what your idea of success is long term. So, for example, you might have a game that's free to play versus something that you're tracking sales on. Therefore, your community and topping up the funnel every couple of months is more important. So, ultimately, when you're doing that, I guess, A/B testing of platforms, really you should have a view of what your success looks like so you can optimize it ultimately. One of the things with the kind of campaign planning that we like to do is we tend to look at who we think our audience is, target where we think they are, and then obviously you'll start pivoting once you realize. That's why you start early, like Hollie said. You need to start as early as you possibly can, often around, once you've got past the prototype stage, if you've got something pretty to show, or something silly, a good, janky bug GIF always works, but, just looking at where you think people will exist, that will give you the starting point moving forwards.
And go for it.
I think kind of speaking purely from the traditional media point of view, I think it's important to keep in mind the legitimacy that kind of dealing with traditional media gives your game and kind of helps you then reach other kind of segments of the media. There are a lot of influencers out there, for example, who would read Edge magazine and kind of things like that, which kind of add a lot of authority to your product. That's what we did on Ukulele. We kind of launched with a kind of a big feature on Edge, and then suddenly it was a lot easier to go and speak to kind of YouTubers and influencers who perhaps reach
I was one of them.
All right, yeah.
One of them.
You got good PR as well.
Because on top of that, I mean, obviously, it's people who really care are going to Google your game, and all the results are going to be, traditional media outlets.
I think we've used the buzzword trust quite a lot. I think most people in this room are probably gamers themselves and are very aware of the gaming platforms, which means you probably have platforms that you prefer. We are grown up enough to know that there have been issues with trust around influencers on certain platforms. But to completely cut yourself off from those platforms because I don't like so-and-so as a YouTuber, I don't like streamers, it's cutting yourself off from potentially reaching a new audience. So try and look past that and see who is out there to work with. But also you have to be realistic. And it's very important that when you understand with some of the influencers, especially big ones, a lot of them don't work for free because they don't have to. And if you can get some time with them and they want to cover the game and they're excited and they'll do it for free, that is a win. That is huge. But you do still have to be realistic. And often, the bigger the outlet, the harder it can be to get a slice of their time because everybody wants their time. But from our experience, one of the best things you can do is understand what your platform needs. Now, if you want to talk to traditional games media, so what we would call press, so this could either be online or magazine, chances are they're going to need to see something, so they're going to need to see a prototype or a preview build, and they're going to need time with you to interview you. So they're going to need your personal time. If you want to work with content creators, let's say people who make video on demand like YouTubers, they're going to need B-roll. So this is video of your game capture that they can then use to edit to make a video on. The amount of times I couldn't cover an independent game because there was no video to make a video with, we just had to say, sorry, come back to us when you get a chance. By then it's too late, we're too busy. That was that shot to get us excited, and you had no assets for us to use. If you want to work with streamers, they're going to need something to stream. So chances are a polished final build. The general audience, and I cannot stress this enough, it doesn't matter how many times you say this is a pre-alpha build, people will still be in the comments going, it doesn't look any good. Yet we've just said it was pre-alpha. You need to have a stable and solid build. So I really want you guys to think about the platform you want to go for, and do you have beats in your campaign to provide the assets you're going to need? Because if you want to give screenshots for a magazine, those screenshots are going to take time to capture and edit. B-roll takes time to capture and edit. And of course, that game's going to take time to make, to have it bug-free enough to give to a streamer. So I want you to consider what those platforms mean for your strategy.
So is it correct basically saying that you need to consider all the channels and see where your audience is, as Korina pointed out, and you need assets management, assets creation, as Hollie pointed out, and you need to have a story to tell, as Andy, sorry, I just realized you got two Andy.
Sat next together as well to make it extra easy.
It wasn't intentional, by the way. But so I think this is quite important that what I see, and what I see, because my job as running a communication agency is actually having people coming to me and say, I want to launch my game, and I see Activision did that, or Ubisoft did that, and they're looking at the very AAA world, which is where I'm coming from. But what I think the panel seems to agree is that every approach is different, and you need to invest time in telling a story and going to what they call a consumer journey towards the channel that you use. And talking about consumers, I mean, that's very Italian, huh? Consumer journey. No.
The Italian accent's fake. It's not.
Yeah, I know, right?
It's not Italian.
No, not Italian, not Italian. Well, for the moment, we'll see. But this coming to my next bit, which is, again, in the past, channel used to work in isolation. Media was very impactful. Influencer didn't exist. Now we have this multi-channel approach to communication. And we are in a chicken and egg situation where, in my experience, and I would like the panel to comment this, it's a chicken and egg situation where you need community to get the attention from both media influencers, but vice versa, you need to build community. It's just a chicken and egg situation where do you need to start building community first? And how you do that, or you just need to use the media and influencers to build the community. It's a bit of again chicken egg situation, and I don't think anyone got the right answer. But there's something that happens happens a lot. The question that I get in general, and this is what I want to share with the panel about. How you solve the problem of building a community without using the traditional media, and how important is this today? Because, of course, everyone comes from different disciplines, so it would be interesting to have your point of view.
I think a good example is a game that I launched a couple of months back. So it wasn't a game that the traditional media were particularly interested in. We didn't have much coverage at all. But we spent 6 months building community using places like IMGA, the kind of GIF image board, Reddit, basically the kind of very much ground level community platforms, and we built it using basically through beta testers. So we just ran an open beta over Christmas. The game was a multiplayer game. It was a 2-player only co-op experience. So we knew it was going to be a limited audience. It was only on PC and mobile at the time because the Nintendo Switch version had slipped, because obviously, of course it did. So we were like, okay, these platforms are fairly open. So how do we work with that? So we basically built the community from nothing, starting over Christmas, because we knew that's when most people would be at home with their kids. It was a very family-focused game. And we just offered the free build of the first level of the game. That, even though when we launched it still didn't hit the kind of traditional press, influencers went mad with it because they saw that it had a community. So I think that kind of long game is definitely the right thing. And I think we're going to hammer home like timelines during this entire panel, I'm sure. But ultimately, that's just down to kind of thinking about who your audience is and being selective. Also, pivoting. Like, we didn't expect the press to not be as interested. We thought there would be at least a little bit more interest. So we immediately just changed our tactic and went straight to community. And ultimately, the game's done really well off the back of that. And I'm sure Nintendo would be a different story because it's much more press-friendly at the moment.
So you've been agile, essentially.
Yeah.
You've started changing which is one of the big things that the indie world, you can be agile.
This is a 2-person development team from Denmark, self-funding. So, it's not a big company. So again, the budgets are tiny, so you can be really, really smart with how you use their time.
I mean, community is just one avenue as well. So yes, you want to be thinking about building that community, but try and reach as many people in different places as possible. So for example, when I was on PlayStation Access, nearly every indie game I covered came from one of 3 places. A PR that I have known for years called me and said, look, I've got this indie game. I know your style. I know your type. This would be perfect. Will you please consider it? I have that relationship with the PR. They know if they waste my time continuously, I will stop believing them. It's just true. My time is precious. We get 1 million emails a day asking us to cover games. So of course, I then cover it. I go to events quite a lot. PSX was probably one of my favorites because I didn't have any appointments, and I went what I called indie shopping, which is where I'd literally wander around and I would see the artwork. And I'd be like, oh, tell me about your game. And they would be the indies I would be just dying to see more over the next 12 months. And they would have, coverage almost non-stop across our channel every time they had a beat because I got excited about it. And social media was probably the biggest one for me. The retweeting of artwork in my timeline is usually all I need to get me excited. I mean, that Untitled Goose Game, all I've seen of it are a couple of GIFs in my Twitter timeline. I don't even follow the developers, but they've appeared, and now I'm like, well, that Goose Game, that is what we need to cover on PlayStation Access. And those kind of ideas of, the more people you can have following you, I suppose there is that reach to get out there. But community is not the only thing you need to rely on. You need to have it. It takes a long time to build. It is very rare to have overnight success in building community. It is very rare to have enough exposure in one afternoon that all of a sudden you've got 10,000 followers who are going to live and die by your game. It is hard work. But also just try and reach them offline as well, because getting people's eyes to see the artwork, to engage with you, to ask questions, it hooks their hearts and minds in a way where they will want to follow you and want to tell people about you. And it's invaluable when you've got their hearts and minds. It's absolutely invaluable.
Can I ask a question to everyone here? Because it just come to my mind just listening to you, Hollie. And I think it's more for ND1, ND2 as an ex-journalist and Hollie than me and Korina. Yeah, ND1, ND2, okay. Because there is a big challenge about what Hollie said about, you need to use social media. Because I think, do you guys agree that today having a good quality game is not enough to sell or at all?
100%. So what we talked about earlier with the number of games that are launching on Steam, obviously we've got similar parallels on Xbox, on mobile's even worse, on PlayStation is also bad, and on Switch, very few discoverability mechanisms on that platform, so you're struggling straight out of the gate. On what Hollie said about community and building communities, it's absolutely invaluable for you to have a sexy asset of some sort. And I don't mean sexy in terms of the pure definition of it. I mean something that basically attracts attention and people are like, that thing looks different, what is that? I'd also set aside like an afternoon a week, if you can, to just do community management, to just pitch people. Because you'll find that everyone, when they first start doing this, is terrible at it. So what happens is, as you do it more and more, you get better at it. But it is a very important thing to always do screenshot Saturdays, to always put out some cool GIFs that you spent some time on, because ultimately you can grow things organically. Another tactic which is really, really useful is to use things like IndieDB as a platform to put your build out there, have like a snapshot of the game, like Korina mentioned.
The other thing with IndieDB is the blog system, which people don't use enough.
Yep.
But weirdly, they base all of their rewards off it. So if you do enough blogs and you get enough views, it doesn't matter how big your game is commercially, they'll still give you an award if you have enough blog views. So there's a tip for you.
And going to Andy, so you've been a journalist and a developer, and now you go back being a journalist again. So I love your website, and of course I got a bit biased because it's here. I couldn't say I didn't like it, but no, I generally love it. But with this idea that we sometimes often read, that journalists are bad, influencers are the future to reach your consumer, and creating this, we live in a world where everything is divisive. Everything is black and white. There's no a middle ground, apparently, anymore. So with this idea that I disagree with, the journalists are bad, the influencers are good, so good and evil. And what take you from opening a new website in the current climate? I mean, you know.
I'd say, first of all, I enjoy reporting on the games industry. I love kind of meeting developers, hearing their stories, and then kind of being able to pass those on to an audience. It's a very different change of pace to working on, you know, one game for 2 or 3 years compared to kind of working a million miles an hour in kind of the games news space. I mean, there are a lot of really, really good content creators out there. And I just felt from my position, looking from the outside for the first time, that in the traditional kind of news space that it could be stronger. And I felt kind of a desire to kind of go back and to contribute to that, to the you know, the good journalists that are already there doing great stuff and kind of help make it stronger. You know, it's an issue that's facing journalism in lots of different fields, not just games. And I think it's really important for there to be a strong traditional press. You know, they may frustrate, you know, sometimes with their awkward questions and tanking your Metacritic, etc. But they're also really, really important to expose the important issues and to tell the stories of developers, because ultimately no one's going to be better at telling interesting stories about their games than these people who do it for a living. Fantastic.
And then I'm conscious of time. I want to just jump quickly to Hollie, because I say to you, we know, I genuinely believe you're the most inspirational professional in our industry. You started in PR, just then community, then go PlayStation Access, and now you're head of communication of CD Projekt Red. So you now come back as a head of community. So what is, in your opinion, the biggest challenge for today's game developer in the discoverability, based on your experience? Because you've been everywhere, so there is not lots of people that encapsulate your experience and your knowledge in all those different areas.
The biggest difficulty you're ever going to have is market share, is being heard above everybody else who's trying to be heard, who's going to have the most visual assets in a field of people making visual assets. When you've got the top 20 streamers all playing the same damn game and trying to convince them to not stream Fortnite for 10 minutes to maybe try your game feels impossible unless you're about to throw them truckloads of cash. Chances are it probably is actually impossible unless you're going to throw them truckloads of cash. But it can feel like you're trying to push water up a hill. But more often than not, it's just getting that one person, maybe that one outlet, that one streamer, that one YouTuber to take your game and believe in it. But if you're not putting yourself out there, you're not there for that streamer, that YouTuber, that writer to discover. You're just lowering your chances of finally having your moment to stand out. And when you have that moment, make sure you are ready to capitalize on it. The assets are there, the website is ready. There's a press section on your website where people can download artwork, images, B-roll. These should be standard for absolutely anybody making a game. You should have a website where me, as a YouTuber, might see that retweet in my timeline that gets me excited. So I've clicked on your Twitter, there's a link to your website, I've gone to your website, I've seen a trailer that looks great. So now I'm clicking on the press section, I'm taking the assets to make a video, there's your email address, and yes, you've responded to my email. You need the opportunities, and you have to be ready to capitalize, because they don't come along as they should. Because most of you here are going to make beautiful, wonderful games. And there is nothing more heartbreaking than your beautiful and wonderful game not getting the time and attention it deserves because it's trying to fight. But there are people out there that will want to fall in love with it, so make sure you're ready.
Thank you so much. So I'm conscious about time we're done, yeah? So one quick thing to summarize that I think it come out that when you think about communicating game and get discoverable, you need to go to as many platforms as possible, including a lot social media, influencers, everyone gonna fulfill something. It's hard work. So if you guys have any question, most of us gonna be around. But thank you very much.